Hello to all of you, good evening. I'm glad that you are here now. My name is John Satras. I'm professor in the University of the Aegean, the Department of Mediterranean Studies, dealing with modern history, European modern history. I'd like to thank the Institution of International Economic Relations for inviting me to function as a representative of your speech. I'd like also to thank the head of the institution, Professor Tsartanidis. I would like to thank all of you, and especially I would like to thank the ambassador, who is now here. Thank you very much for coming here to visit us. I don't know if you want to say something or...
No, it's okay.
It's okay, a bit later. So we are now here to hear the speech of Professor Nanako Murata. She's coming from a famous university in Japan, University of Tokyo. It's a private university. She's a professor of modern European history. And she also deals with modern Greek history, dealing with about that period of the interwar years and the Second World War, but especially the interwar years. She's going to speak to us about a great event that happened during the disaster, the minor Asian disaster. It's about a ship, a cargo, Japanese cargo, which was assumed to be there. We're not sure about that yet. She's going to talk about that. We assume that it was there, and the ship helped to protect a lot of Greek refugees, a large number of Greek refugees, more than 800 people, we assume as well. We don't know if this event is real or is bad, but we have to examine this, and the professor here is working on this. She's making extensive research in every part of the world, let me say that. I mean, in Japan, in Europe, in Greece, in Turkey, Smyrna, everywhere to find some things to substantiate her argument about all these events that happened at that period in Asia Minor. Let me also say that Asia Minor disaster was a disaster, as I said. It was a great disaster for the whole of Hellenism. Because as you know, there was there a civilization of 3,000 years, almost 3,000 years, with a large part inhabited by Greeks, a huge and immense Greek civilization, with great cities like Miletos, like Ephesus, like Phokia, and so many others. Also at the beginning of the 20th century, there was most of the population in Smyrna, especially in the city of Smyrna, was Greek, of Greek origin. In other parts, of course, there were other people, like Muslims or like Armenians, Jews. It was a cosmopolitan area, all this area surrounding Smyrna. So the Greeks hoped, in accordance with their ideology, the so-called Megali idea, to incorporate that area into the modern Greek state. This was a vision of many Greeks, especially of Phoenicians, who dreamed to unite both sides of the Aegean. I'll speak later. So I'll give you to go on with the speech. Thank you.
Καλησπέρα σας. Αρχίζω αυτή τη διάλεξη για λίγο στη ελληνική γλώσσα. Είμαι ευτυχισμένη που είμαι μαζί σας εδώ απόψε και χαίρομαι πολύ που ήρθατε για να ακούσετε με ενδιαφέρον για τη μελέτη μου σχετικά με την διάσωση των Ελλήνων από τον Ιαπωνικό πλοίο κατά την Μικρασιατική καταστροφή στην Σμύρνη το Σεπτέμβριο του 1922. Έχω έρθει πολλές φορές στο παρελθόν στην Ελλάδα για να κάνω έρευνα στην Αθήνα και στη Θεσσαλονίκη. Είχα πολλές καλές σχέσεις με την Ελλάδα και τους Έλληνες και αυτές οι σχέσεις με ενθαρρύνουν να μελετήσω περισσότερο την ιστορία σας. Αυτά είναι τα ελληνικά μου. Now I speak in English. As Professor Sakas just told you, I'm a historian of modern Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean world. I'm the only person who has been working on this topic in Japan. When it comes to Greece, most people throughout the world imagine ancient Greece because ancient Greek civilization has a great influence on the history of all humanity. In this sense, I'm quite exceptional. Greece and its surrounding region, far from Japan, have fascinated me for years, and I have had a lot of heartwarming experiences with people living there. Today, I am going to talk about a very intriguing historical event where Japanese history and Greek history intersected. During my stay in Greece in the late 1990s, I met several Greeks who told me that in 1922, a Japanese ship helped Greeks and Armenians who tried to escape the devastating fire in Smyrna, today known as Izmir, a port city in Western Asia Minor. At first, I did not take it seriously. I thought it was just an unfounded rumor. I could not find any good reason why a Japanese ship would be at Smyrna's quay. That is why I set this topic aside at that time. But in later years, I started to research this event. Interestingly enough, as the research progressed, I found that we could not easily discard the story of the Japanese rescue operation in Smyrna as groundless. The stage for what happened lies in post-World War I Smyrna. The historical roots of Smyrna dated back to ancient Greece, which means that there had always been Greek inhabitant with distinct Hellenic culture and tradition, even under Ottoman rule. Smyrna was an international port city, and Westerners such as British, French, Italians, and Americans lived side by side with Greeks, Armenians, Jews, and Turks. After World War I, the Ottoman Empire was partitioned. Then Greece and its allies rushed in to claim territory. Turkey eventually gained its independence in October 1923, but it did so by forcing various long-established non-Turkish ethnic groups, including Greeks and Armenians, to abandon their homeland. That brings back me to the event I would like to tell you about today. The Greek army retreated from Asia Minor on September 8, 1922. After 5 days, in the early afternoon of September 13th, the Turks allegedly set fire to the residential district of Smyrna. The fire spread rapidly and continued for many hours and for many days. the fire forced the inhabitant to swim to the port to escape. A British national captain of the George V at the time observed and recounted the scene as follows. I quote, "About 1 p.m., the fire broke through these front houses almost simultaneously. It was a terrifying thing to see even from the distance. There was the most awful scream one could ever imagine. I believe many people were shocked into the sea, simply by the crowd nearest the houses, trying to get farther away from the fire. Many did undoubtedly jump into sea from sheer panic. It was certainly a horrible scene. Mothers with their babies, the fire going on over their head, and many of the bundle of the clothes also on the fire, and people all screaming," unquote. The city's Greek and Armenian populations instantly became refugees. Many of them are said to have lost their lives. In modern Greek history, this tragic incident is called Mikrasiatiki Catastrophe, or the Asia Minor disaster. It brought the curtain down on the 2,500-year history of the Greek community in Asia Minor. At the time of the fire, some Allied warships and countless other merchant ships were in Smyrna harbor. But most of them refused to pick up the refugees. Amid all the chaos, a Japanese ship was reported to have unloaded all its cargo, and they took as many refugees as possible. Then the ship transported them onward to the port of Piraeus, or Piraeus. According to a New York Times article of September 18, 1922, I quote, "On Thursday last, that is September 14th, there were 6 steamers at Smyrna to transport the refugees. 1 American, 1 Japanese, 2 French, and 2 Italian. The American and Japanese steamers accepted all comers without examining their papers, while others took only foreign subjects with a passport," unquote. The French newspaper, Le Temps, also reported the evacuation of the Greeks from Smyrna with the help of Japanese ship on the same day. George Horton, American Consul General in Smyrna, verified that as well. He wrote to the U.S. Secretary of State, "A Japanese boat brought off some refugees, and I've heard threw overboard some of their cargo for the purpose." Passengers on the ship speak in the highest term of the kindness of the Japanese officers and men. Later, contemporary articles in other American newspapers, such as the Atlanta Constitution and the Boston Globe, echoed those statements. I have also discovered several Greek newspapers that told of the refugee rescue operation by a Japanese ship. They are more descriptive than American newspapers. What interests us most is that they indicated that the name of the Japanese ship. For example, the newspaper Embros reported the incident with the headline, "Το σφαγείο της Σμύρνης, η γενναία στάση των Ιαπώνων," or "Massacre in Smyrna, Japanese act bravery." It says as follows. This is a bit long, but very interesting, so I will quote, translating the Greek text into English. I quote, "It is worthwhile to refer to a philanthropic event as well as the brave conduct of a captain from a Japanese ship, the TOKEI MARU. He was successful in helping 825 Greek refugees, despite the threat of the Turks, when the Japanese captain, pained by the terrible slaughter of the inhabitants and the petitions from Greek refugees, sent out all the lifeboats their ship had in order to take on board as many refugees as possible. Officers of Kemal military forces surrounded the boat and threatened to sink them. Then the Japanese captain immediately declared in person to the Kemalist officers that if they touched even a hair of the refugees, he would regard this act as an insult against the Japanese flag, a threat against the Japanese government, and he would request an immediate apology from the Kemalist government. Facing these warnings, the Turks consulted their superior officer and were obliged to let those refugees who had gotten on the boat leave freely. Unquote. The TOKEI MARU was the name of the Japanese ship that was supposed to have saved the refugees. Other Greek newspapers named the same Japanese ship as the savior of the Greeks. I have also looked at major Japanese newspapers. A great deal of news about Smyrna in September 1922 reached Japan. Their sources were based mostly on second-hand information from London. They reported that Kemalist troops entered the city of Smyrna and behaved aggressively. They also described the scenes of thousands of Greeks and Armenians escaping the Turkish violence in Smyrna. Judging from a great many articles in contemporary Japanese newspapers, we can conclude that many Japanese readers were concerned with the tragic affairs happening in Asia Minor at that time. But in spite of the great interest in this event, so far I have not discovered any article in Japanese newspapers that referred to the Japanese ship helping those desperate refugees. I could not even find any official document at the historical archives of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo to confirm the contribution of the Japanese ship to this event. The only exception I have come across in Japan was an article from the Japan Times and Mail, an English-language newspaper in Japan. The article, dated October 21st, 1922, stated, "A Japanese merchantman brought succor to the refugees en route to Greece and gave them the kindest treatment. That is all." My research did not end at this stage. I delved deeper. I started investigating whether the TOKEI MARU, the Japanese ship that mentioned in Greek newspapers, really existed and went all the way to Smyrna in 1922 from the Far East. I found that this was not an easy task. After time-consuming research, I finally discovered a ship named TOKEI MARU in the register books of shipping in the 1920s. The Dairen Toba Kisen Kabushiki Gaisha, a Japanese shipping company, owned the ship. The TOKEI MARU's port of registry was Dairen City, now in China. But at that time, Dairen was in the Kanto district, which was under Japanese control. Look at this map. Here is Dairen. Dairen is still one of the renowned port cities in the world. I also discovered that a Chinese company chartered the TOKEI MARU in the year of 1922. and send it to the Mediterranean Sea. The Japanese audience here may read what is written here. I wonder if this means that the captain of the ship is of Japanese nationality, and we may consider the possibility that the captain, officers, and crew are Chinese. In fact, some Greek newspapers mentioned Lu as the captain's name of the TOKEI MARU. But as the Japanese audience here immediately notice, Lu does not sound like a Japanese name. Rather, it sounds like a Chinese name. Another Greek newspaper referred to Lu as a company name, like Lu Brother Company, not as a captain name. To address this problem, I met Mr. Kasai, president of the Japan Captain Association in Tokyo, and asked him how the system of a chartered ship was operated at the beginning of the 20th century. According to him, when a ship was chartered out, a captain and officers were also hired as belonging to the ship. In addition, he told me that it was only quite recently that the Japanese regulation allowed foreigners to be a captain of a ship of Japanese nationality. Moreover, since China of that period was retarded in terms of shipping industry, it was hard to imagine that Chinese captain sails all the way to the Mediterranean Sea from the Far East. Several articles in contemporary periodicals published in the Japanese community in Dairen support his view. Based on articles of the periodicals, Japanese shipping companies avoided hiring Chinese at that time because they were not regarded self-disciplined by the Japanese standard calling for strike. Therefore, we may be safe to say that if the TOKEI MARU had been chartered by some Chinese company, the ship might have still been steered by a Japanese captain. The problem still remained. Even though the TOKEI MARU existed, we do not know if its shipping route included Smyrna, and if it did, we could not tell if the ship was there at the time of Smyrna's destruction. I needed to dig even deeper to answer these questions. I examined all available sources at the archives and the libraries in Japan, but I could not find any record of the TOKEI MARU's operation. I had a chance to visit historical archives in Izmir, Turkey, and asked librarians if they had any Port Authority record of 1922. They said all the record of the ship's entry of those days must have been lost because of the confusion caused by the war. I asked the Port Authority of Piraeus by way of the Japanese Embassy of Greece if they had any records, but they had nothing. It is said the German troops destroyed all the record when they occupied Greece during the Second World War. Then I flew to London to explore the archives of the newspaper of Lloyd's, the oldest and biggest maritime insurance company in the world. Finally, I found the record of the TOKEI MARU's operation. According to the record, the TOKEI MARU arrived at Smyrna on August 16, 1922, just before the Turkish army launched its all-out attack against the Greek army. We do not know exactly when the TOKEI MARU left Smyrna, but the record showed that it then left for Piraeus, Greece, and arrived there on September 7th. And next day, that is on September 8th, the TOKEI MARU again sailed to Smyrna from Piraeus. This was the day when the Greek administration in Smyrna ended. We also have a photo. Look at this. A ship with a Japanese flag at the bay of Smyrna appears. Interestingly enough, it has a note in Italian on its margin saying Smyrna, September 8, 1922. The departure of the Greek army and the rescue of Greeks and Armenians by the Japanese steamer. You can find this photo on the website. I have not been able to identify yet who took this photo and where the original photo is located now. I cannot tell either if the ship in the photo is the TOKEI MARU or not, but it is at least certain that this photo was taken in Smyrna. There is also an article in the Greek newspaper Scrip on September 9, 1922, the day when the Kemarist army entered into Smyrna. It reported that the TOKEI MARU saved 1,600 refugees from Smyrna. Now we are getting confused. As I told you in the beginning part of this lecture, articles in New York Times, Luton, and several Greek newspapers reported in a very dramatic manner that the Japanese ship rescued the Greeks who desperately tried to escape the fire. But as I just mentioned, there is a different story that the Japanese rescue operation was carried out before the outbreak of the fire. How can we reconcile these two different narratives? When I started conducting research on this topic, I thought that a Japanese ship helped the Greeks evacuating Smyrna only one time. But taking into consideration all the sources I have collected so far, it is most likely that the TOKEI MARU rescued the Greek refugees twice, before and after the fire broke out. If we accept the record of the Lois, the departure date of an Italian note in the photo and the Greek newspaper Scrip's article can be regarded as correct, though there remains a difference of a couple of days among them. Greek refugees evacuated Smyrna with the help of the Japanese ship before the fire broke out on September 13th. Given that Greek defeat was certain by the end of August in 1922, and the Greek army and officials withdrew from Asia Minor by September 8th, there is a possibility that some fellow Greek inhabitant Armenians, who are afraid of violence and massacre by the Turks, decided to leave Smyrna, boarding the Japanese ship in a more orderly way, before the Kemarist army officially reached the city. As you saw the photo with an Italian note, people in the photo were not panic-stricken and lacked the tense atmosphere that would prevail in such an operation. In fact, we have evidence that many inhabitants left the city before the final destruction of Smyrna. The second rescue operation might have been carried out in the middle of the fire. The TOKEI MARU might have gotten the Greek and Armenian refugees out of burning Smyrna just in time, as described in the American, French, and Greek newspapers, since the destruction of Smyrna by the fire caused considerable shock not only to Greeks, but also to Europeans and Americans. It is probable that we have more newspaper articles about the second rescue operation than the first one. I would like to tell you one more different narratives to be added. Penelope Delta, Greek female famous writer of that period, participated in the relief activity for the refugee from the Asia Minor. She heard from one of the refugees about the help of the Japanese ship. She wrote in her memoirs, "Only the Japanese, who had one or two ships, collected as many miserable people as possible and transferred them to Michelin." Her account suggests another possibility that more than one Japanese ship were in Smyrna, and that the Greek refugee arrived at other places in addition to Piraeus. I think I will need to examine this case further. However, having said that, at this point, we cannot be absolutely 100% sure if the rescue operation of the Japanese ship TOKEI MARU was a historical fact based on solid sources. Evidence from Japan is necessary to prove this event. As I told you before, I have not yet discovered any record about this event in Japan. So I wrote this story for a Japanese major newspaper, Nihon Keizai Shimbun, last October. I asked its readers to give me any information they might have about this event. As a consequence, fortunately indeed, I was able to find and meet the grandson of the owner of the TOKEI MARU. Mr. Kikuchi was almost 80 years old. He was a shipping company in Kobe, a port city in western Japan. He still does business with Greece. According to him, when World War II ended and Japan was defeated, the Japanese working at his grandfather's shipping company, fled China and returned to Japan with a few of their belongings. They started a new shipping company in Kobe. But even worse, an earthquake struck Kobe in 1995. It destroyed almost all the materials related to the previous company that they had brought back from China 50 years ago. He did not remember if his grandfather and father had told him what happened in Smyrna in 1922. If necessary, I will visit historical archives in Thailand to do research, though foreign researchers are allowed strictly limited access to historical sources in China. Now I sometimes feel like a professional traveler rather than a historian. Recently, I have received many grassroots reports from people whose relatives have been rescued by the Japanese ship. For example, one old Greek man in Thessaloniki tells that his grandfather has repeatedly talked that he was saved by the Japanese. His grandfather was 33 years old in 1922 and worked as a cook in Smyrna. When the fire broke out, he ran for safety to the port of Smyrna in his apron. A Japanese ship picked him up and he saw Japanese crew eat rice in a bowl with chopsticks. When the ship brought the refugees in Piraeus, the port authority there did not accept the refugees from Smyrna because they didn't have passport with them. He remembered that the Japanese captain strongly claimed that people who speak the same language as the Greeks in mainland should be accepted. Another example from a Greek American in New York tells that her aunt was rescued by a Japanese ship. Her aunt also remembered that on board, the refugees were given rice and ate it with their own hand because they did not know how to use the chopsticks, while Japanese crew skillfully used them. Neither of them told the name of the ship and its captain to their relatives. This is all I can tell you today. My research continues. I will not give up. I continue to search for facts to paint a complete picture of the event. I am still eager to uncover what really happened in Smyrna in September 1922. Soon a century will pass since the tragedy of Smyrna. The Asia Minor disaster had a great impact on trajectory of modern Greek history. Before that milestone is reached, I will be pleased if I can substantiate the rescue operation by the Japanese ship as a historical fact based on solid sources. I believe good deeds should be rewarded and remembered in history. Now I feel very happy to be able to conduct research as a historian. A historian's task is to find the missing links in the narratives of human experiences. Thank you very much. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Allow me to thank the professor for her very interesting and exciting speech, really. It's a very interesting event. You mentioned this as an event, as a story, but it's a historical event, a historical story, and as a historical one, it has wider implications. This is not about just a ship, a Japanese ship, okay? It's about a ship who was at that time in the Mediterranean. It's behind the ship is the whole country, a whole nation, Japan, and we have to examine the implication of this event are also political implications, social, economic, and all these kind of events. But you start from this minor event to reach to what the wider implication. What I want to say is that, okay, there was a great disaster for the Hellenism then, at that time, at 1922. We have certain events we have to have in mind in order to understand the event, as you say. For example, on 9th of September, the Turks entered the city of Smyrna. Then, on 13th of September, the fire broke out in the Armenian neighborhood at first, at the beginning, and then it exploded to other neighborhoods and to the Greek community. From 13th to 16th of September, we have a great fire in Smyrna. Smyrna is burned. Okay, so it's a great disaster, this one. So the photo is on the 8th of September. It's certainly before the fire and certainly before the arriving of the Turks. If you look carefully at the picture, you see many people there at the gate, and who are not, I think there's a large degree of quietness. It's not a panic. Okay, they're there just waiting for something. Maybe they are waiting to leave because they have heard that the Turks are approaching the city. So it will be a disaster. So they are ready to go. The ship, you said, the photo is 8th of September. Then the ship stayed there for a few days, collected hundreds of Greeks. The number is 800. I don't know if it is the exact number, but we say about 836. Okay? Greeks and Armenians, not only Greeks. Among them were also Armenians.
Christian people.
Okay. So, all right. So the ship then stayed at the fire and then left from there to Pyrrhus, then to Crete, and then to Alexandria in Egypt.
Yeah, right.
So we have now to think about this event. From what you say, I'm inclined to think that the event is real, that there was a Japanese ship there. We also know that there were 6 steamers at Smyrna on the 14th of September. Six steamers, okay?
Right.
And one of them is Japanese one. And these steamers took people from the Cape, because as far as I know, the warships of the foreign countries, British warships, Americans, French, Italian, to the largest extent they didn't take refugees. They took their own nationals, asking also for passports. Not all of them, but most of them. Okay, but there were also cargoes, or as we say, steamers, that took refugees. I know from my own knowledge that there was an Italian ship who took a lot of Greeks there and brought them to Italy, to Piraeus first, and then left and went to Italy. So I'm inclined to think that it's a real event. What are now the wider implications of this event? The wider implication of this event is, for example, a question I may ask is what exactly, why the captain reacted as he did? Because as far as I know, the Japanese there were neutral to the conflict.
Yeah.
Maybe there's also, I think, evidence that the Japanese supported the Turks with ammunition. There's an indirect reference in your paper to this. But the general stance was neutrality, okay? So why the captain helped the Greeks was only because of humanitarian reasons, because he was very sad about this whole situation and he wanted to help the Greeks. This is, for me, a crucial question, because the captain knew about this neutrality of his government.
Probably, yes. Yeah.
Probably knew. So, I mean, in a way, I could say that he risked his own life, or the life of the people on the ship. Right? It was a very decisive, a very great decision, this one. And then another question is, what was the cargo of this ship? It was carbon, it was silk. What it transferred this carbon? Because from this we can make conclusion about the economic relations or the economic role of the Japanese in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time. See, it's economic history. So there's the role of the captain, political history here. We have the economic aspect of all of this event, as you say, but it's a minor event, but it's a great event really. So we have to, I think, we have to go on with this research and to try to find out more about what this ship did, if they existed, what they did, what was their role, and also what was the role of the Japanese as a nation, as a state, as a government to this great conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean at the time. So there are many questions you can ask. I'm really amazed by your research. You go everywhere to find out if there was this ship. Okay, we can go on with your questions, whatever, or your observations. Yes, yes, please.
Have you managed to trace any names of the rescued people? And if you have managed to trace any other picture of the ship?
Any other picture in Smyrna you mentioned?
No, in general, the ship. The actual ship.
No, you mean it's foreign ships? Not except for this ship, you mean?
No, this ship. If you have managed to place the exact picture of this ship, how it looks like.
You know, get a picture of this ship.
Yes, I have the ship. I have the ship photos, but not. This ship originally built in England, and it's about 80, 90, something like that. And the original ship sailed to Australia, and then a Japanese company bought the ship. So I don't know. I have the original form of I have the photos of original form, and so I don't know in 1920s how it is what it is like. That is the answer.
Compare with the picture you have behind you.
This one. If you are a specialist of ship, you can identify probably, but this is really small part of the ship, so it is difficult to. It is TOKEI MARU or not.
Any names of the people rescued? You spoken of a guy whose grandfather was saved at that time. If you have traced any names of the people who were saved?
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Have you traced any names of the people saved by the Japanese ship?
No. I have just two oral history, two persons from the oral history, but this is not a dialect. It's for example, this is a grandson of someone who was saved by the Japanese ship, or aunt, her aunt is Greek Americans whose aunt was saved by a Japanese ship. So unfortunately, I didn't have any direct information or oral history. So it said it's 100 years almost past. So nobody was alive. Anybody was alive anymore. So nobody.
Professor Tsadanidis, would you like to add something?
Yes, I would like to thank you for this stimulating lecture you gave us. It is our honor that we have you together, and it is the first event of the new academic year. I have two questions and one observation, one comment. Do you know what is the handwriting? What is the meaning of the handwriting there in the photo, in the picture?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what it says? Does it say? Because I'm not able to understand. But
it says I have just told that September. This is
not
the
date, September.
Yes.
Date September 1922.
There on the other side.
Mm-hmm. And the other side is that where is it? Wait. Just told you. Smyrna, the departure of Greek army and the rescue of Greeks and Armenians by the Japanese steamer.
Okay. Now, from the picture, it seems that it was shot in the afternoon. If we know the location and the sun, it looks like it is afternoon. And from the ship, it seems that it is empty of cargo. Or at least it is not heavy cargo on the ship. You see, from the Karina, it seems that. Another comment is they said that departed from Pyrrhus on 7th. You don't know the exact time. And in the evening of next day, it was in Smyrna. From Pyrrhus to Smyrna, at that time and the speed of the ship, have you verified that it was
almost 1 day?
Almost 1 day, 24 hours.
24
from
hours,
Pyrrhus
I asked expert on that ship.
That's right. Oh, this is why my question. So it was 24 hours. In order to be in Smyrna on the 8th, it should departed at least in the evening from Pyrrhus. Huh?
Yeah, and I want to say that, I want to add that sometimes Lois record, even Lois record made mistakes. So, we can say that the 2-3 days difference we can ignore sometimes. Sometimes.
Okay. So that means that it is accurate.
Yeah.
The dates and the hours. Okay.
Anyway, in the middle of war, so it's.
My general observation is what you both pointed out about the Greek presence in Asia Minor from thousands of years. This is a myth, and especially for Smyrna, is not what history says to us. On 17th of century, the vast majority of Smyrna population was Muslim. The Greeks were very few. They started coming in Smyrna from the middle or the beginning of the 8th century. And most of them, including my grandfather, they settled down in Smyrna after the middle of the 9th century and in the end of the 9th century.
So most of the Greeks are immigrating
from
the mainland?
From the mainland, from Asia Minor, from Cappadocia. They are coming from the east and from the west, because they were economic migrants, most of them. Most of the inhabitants of Kythera, for example, they settled down in Smyrna. They were perhaps the majority of the island of the population of Kythera went to Smyrna to settle down. This was the destiny of the Greeks, to find job abroad. And because they were not paying taxes due to capitulations, the Ottoman Empire was able to attract many Greeks from the mainland. So in Smyrna there were two kinds of Greek population. The Greek citizens who were not paying taxes and who were able to enjoy a lot of benefits due to capitulations. And then it was the Greek from the Ottoman Greeks who were coming to Smyrna from other places. And so I think this was a Greek construction that Smyrna was a Greek city. Actually the majority, the relative majority in 1922 were Greeks, but most of them were migrants. They were not natives. All were second generation. I have to clarify that because here in Greece many will incline as other people to construct myth. And saying that, I think perhaps, because nobody in the first hours from 13th to 15th of September, no one was helping the Greek refugees, and many of them were trying to swim, even the ladies, but they were heavy dresses, and so it was very easy to lose their lives in the sea. Only the men were able to approach some ships, and they refused to accept them. So my main, let's say, argument is that the Greeks, because they were desperate to have a chance of surviving and were very apprehensive because of the Italians, of French, of English, and they started to imagine, let's say this, I'm putting another explanation as for the sake of the argument, that only the Japanese, a far away people, had us. And this became a legend in Greece, because many people know this incident. And they admire the Japan because of the captains they had. It was their own ones. And the Americans later, Warsaw, ignored their orders and started collecting stories. A lot of books about these stories, but not about the Japanese people. And finished. There is any testimony from around ships, the warships, sailor to see this happening, because there were a lot of warships around. Somebody see, oh, the Japanese ship starting rescuing Greek people. Is there any testimony from?
No, there is no testimony
Okay.
to prove the event.
Yes, of course.
Well, I'm ambassador of the idea, and I came this country August to 2017. So since then I have just spent 2 years, but I had 2 occasions to see the Grand Slam of rescued people. One occasion was the Neo-Smyrna area. They have a community, and they have a kind of museum, and when I visited there, they're very thankful for the rescue of the Japanese ship. That is one occasion. And the other occasion was the, actually last year, Japanese tobacco company, JT International, made a big investment in Xanthi area. Xanthi is the northern part of this, what I say might know. And because of that investment, I was invited to visit Xanthi area. And especially the Japan tobacco company now acquired so-called Greek company Secap. And I met the representative from their labor union, and one of them approached to me that his grandfather was said to buy the Japanese ship in Smyrna. So that is another occasion, and so I think that not only the Athens area, but all over the Greece, there might be many people whose father or grandmother were said to buy Japanese ships. So probably, there is much more chance to get the testimony. If Murata Sensei didn't have a chance to talk with such grandson
So
people.
please let me know.
Yes.
Who is grandson.
Yeah, I think I can find out.
Yeah.
Yes. So probably with the help of people here, maybe we can trace more testimony and get approach to the more real history. Thank you.
Can I say something? I'm doing it's okay.
Comment? Yeah.
初めてどうもありがとうございます。One thing about Japanese presence in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time, and also Japanese role in the war. Japan was actually at war against Turkey. Japan had declared war on Turkey as part of the operations of World War I.
Yeah.
That's why the Imperial Japanese Navy also sent warships in the Aegean Sea during the later stages of World War I. First, just to clarify the situation existing between Turkey and Japan at the time. Technically, Japan was still at war against Turkey, and Japan was still at war against Turkey until 1923, when the Treaty of Lausanne was signed. And Japan is also mentioned in the commemorative plaque behind the Hotel Beau Rivage in Lausanne, commemorating the signatories to the treaty. Perhaps one could suggest, this is just mere personal speculation on my part, that the Japanese merchant ships in the Aegean Sea at the time would probably, as I said, it's just a personal guess of mine, would probably supporting the remnants, if any, of the Japanese Imperial Navy stationed in the Aegean Sea at the time, if any was existing in 1922. Perhaps they had already returned to Japan. And that's all that I wanted to say about the technical state, the relationship between Turkey and Japan in 1922. Once again,
and just I will answer this question first. And the relationship between Japan and Turkey after the World War I, as Japan was one of the allies during the First World War, and at that time, as you said, Japan was against Turkey, Ottoman Empire, and after that, and Japan was a neutral position. So just Professor Sakas told me, Japan should. At that time, Japan was neutral, and why the Japanese captain, if Japanese captain rescued the Greek refugees, violating the neutral policy, and I think one of the reasons I could not find any record in Japan was the captain, as the captain violated the regulation of Japan, formal regulation, formal policy, neutral policy. That's why he didn't leave any record. This is one reason I couldn't find any record so far in the Japanese archives.
So you think you violate orders, maybe?
Yeah, I think so.
Special orders also?
Yeah.
He tried to destroy every evidence.
Everything, yeah. This is one of many reasons.
Yes.
And what kind of things the Japanese ship brought to Mediterranean countries from Far East? At that time, basically from Far East to Europe, ships brought coal to Europe, and Japan at that time, Japan was imported from Turkey, Ottoman Empire, and even Greece, I guess, the tobacco. So they brought coal to Mediterranean. After that, they got tobacco leaves from Izmir and Thessaloniki, or I don't know.
From Egypt, because
from Egypt, yeah.
It made it in Egypt, and Egypt was at the time the main producer of tobacco in the Middle East.
But I'm not sure. There is no evidence to prove my statement.
Don't know if you have other questions, please, or comments.
And I want to say that I'm dealing with oral history, and it is very hard to substantiate oral history because everyone says blah blah blah, and usually the informant tend to embellish their experiences. So, and especially 100 years ago. So, as a historian, I should be very cautious about this event. I don't want to say Japan did such wonderful things to Greeks. I don't want to say that. So, from now on, I'm planning to continue. I'm planning to research somewhere to find out historical sources, and if I found very and so far I have information. I have indirect information like newspapers and some periodical writings, but I would like to find out direct information, direct sources. For example, if I found out the diaries the captain himself wrote, or logbooks of the ship. If I found that, I'm sure 100% the Japanese ship did such kind of humanitarian activities. But so now, at this point, I cannot say it is a historical fact. And the numbers, for example, Greek newspaper Script, September 9, and 1,600 refugees rescued. I think it's really exaggerated. And this is, I made a mistake, this is 825 refugees. We are not sure. It's just, we have to find out the register of the Piraeus Port Authority. But I've never visited by myself. So in the near future, I would like to visit them and to ask and double check if they don't have anything about the sources related to this event. So it's really hard. It's oral history is really exciting, but sometimes if I take for granted what people say as totally correct, sometimes we go a different way and made mistakes. So I have to be very neutral, and I don't want to take any side so far.
Any other question, please? Yes, Professor Zanakis.
I'm not a historian. I'm international relations, political scientist nowadays. For me, the most interesting thing is I don't care if it is a fact or not. For me, the most interesting thing in this event is the story inside the story. That it created a legend in the Greek, and which is the impact for Greeks and for some of Greek historians who, I don't know if you have research on that, conducted a research at what was the aftermath of people who have know the story and how they consider the story and how they conceive the story, or even some let's say organizations of the refugees. I know very well that a stia of means we honor the Japanese government and gave it and they didn't care about if it is a fact or not. They were satisfied by these things. So there is a different perspective from a constructivist approach. But when you're smiling, you don't...
You're talking a lot of constructivism.
Yeah, but it is very useful as a methodology to find out about the impact of such event or not event. It created something real afterwards. And this for me is the most important thing speaking about the Greek-Japanese relations, because it created an incentive for the Greek people to sympathize with the Japanese because of that, independently of or it is real or not. But this sympathy is real. Do you understand?
The Greek people sympathize with other nations that help us. Okay, we assume that they help us. We're not certain about, okay, maybe.
And this is a case study.
This is
one of the case studies.
This is a very important thing. The other thing I would like to say, as you said before, about the, as a historian, I'm a supporter of the idea of continuity of the Greek nation, of Paparikopoulos. This is, I firmly believe in the continuity of the Greek nation. And what I have to say, just to comment a few things, is that in Asia Minor there was a great Greek civilization in ancient years. For example, when there was a city, a town called Miletos in the 8th century BC, before Christ, there was no Athens at all. There wasn't Athens at all at the 8th century. And Miletos had almost 80 colonies around the Mediterranean. And a great civilization, and other cities, and Phocia and Ephesus, all this Greek nation, all these Greek people living there. You are right, later Greeks left the area. There just remained a few Greeks there through the centuries. But when Venizelos sent a memorandum to the allies asking for this area, his main argument was population. And he put down the numbers, and he said that in Smyrna, the majority of the people were Greeks with certain numbers. But in Smyrna, the town of Smyrna, not the surrounding area, in the surrounding area that the Greek people asked for, okay, through Venizelos, the Greek people were the 1/3 of the total population, 1/3, but was 1/3. It's not a minority so much. Okay, 33%, 35%. Okay, but for me, just to conclude, the important thing of this is, the main question is, what was the role of Japan in the Eastern Mediterranean at that time? This is very important for me, through the ship. For example, the commercial relations between Japan and the Ottoman Empire, or the Egypt, or other countries in the Middle East. This is fundamental for me, the role of Japan in the Middle East politics. At that time, we don't know anything about that. That's why for me it's very important your research. Through a ship you can go upwards and reach to a great level of historical events. This is economic history, commercial history, and of course political history. Okay. I don't know if you have anything to say anymore. Any other comment? I would like to thank all of you for coming here. It's a great pleasure. For our honor to be here with us today, Professor Sawayanagi is the president of the institution, and last but not least, the professor here for this really very interesting, very wonderful speech. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.